I'm ready.
I don't have a clacker, so.
That's okay.
It's funny, like the last two interviews I did, the models really enjoyed clapping along for some reason. Well, welcome to another episode of Meet the Model. I'm here with someone new for me as far as shooting for the first time. We'll do introductions here in a second, but we're doing an entire series of chatting with folks that are other creatives, but on the other side of the camera lens. And I'm very excited about the interview that we have today. I think you're gonna get a lot of different perspective and a lot of tips and ideas and perspective today. So as always, I'm looking forward to another great chat. So why don't we start off with introductions? Again, Scott Dietz.
I'm Sandahl Taylor. Nice to meet everyone.
And just tell us a little bit about yourself, just to get started.
So I have been modeling ever since I was young. I started modeling actually at the age of 3. I was doing Sears catalogs, if anybody remembers what those are.
What are catalogs? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so I was more into print for a long time. And then when I got older, I started doing fashion. I never did fashion until I was about 18, 19 years old. So I started doing fashion and runways, and I actually ended up training models for runways.
Oh, wow.
Becoming a runway coordinator, and then I kind of took a little break from modeling, got into pageants. So they kind of combine a little bit, and then now I'm back.
Great. Well, we'll talk more about pageants here in a minute, but so what was it when you started modeling at such a young age? Was that something that you were just interested in even as a young child, or was that something that your parents kind of like nudged you into? Or
so growing up, my dad was like a hobby photographer, so I always got to like watch him take photos and kind of do it like that. And I really just liked watching what he did, and I was like watching the girls or the subjects that he was like doing the photographs off, and I was like, I could do that.
And so tell me how did like, because Sears, I mean, at least at the time, that's a pretty iconic brand and kind of a big deal, you know? Right. So how did that come about?
So we were working with Sears in their actual photography department. So I ended up becoming like a stock icon photo, if that's what you want to call it. So when you would go into the Sears portrait studio, you would see a little photo of like a couple different children. So I was younger at the time, and then there was like our stock parents, and that ended up being put into the photo. So that was pretty cool. And I did a few different wardrobes, so like a few different clothing. But that was really it. Yeah.
So was that kind of a consistent then, staying involved in modeling ever since that time, or was there like laws and
there was definitely ebbs and flows. So I did that when I was younger, and then I really had no interest in modeling as like a teen or anything like that. I was totally a tomboy. I still feel like somewhat I am. And then,
in a fancy dress though.
In a fancy dress right now, right. But I'm kind of, moving and growing. So I always say, what you see behind the lens isn't always what you see in person. At the end of the day, you see a beautiful image with, someone who is putting their all in front of the camera. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, that's not always everything about that person. Right. So yeah, it's a little bit different now.
That's why I'm kind of excited about these kind of conversations, because you can kind of peel back that onion a little bit, but also get to know the actual people versus just seeing the still images. Or again, there's so much editing that's there and so much, I don't want to say fakeness, but depending on how you portray it and how you go about it. But I've had a few instances where I've met a model in person and I'm like, right, is that the same person?
Is that the same person? Yeah. That's important to me. It's hard because as a model, you're supposed to be like a chameleon, right? So you're supposed to be able to change into whatever either the photographer wants or the designer wants, or, whatever the image is supposed to portray. So I love that capability of having a, look that I can change. But at the same time, when I'm doing images for myself, I want them to look like myself in everyday life. I don't want to look too over edited or too over processed, because I think that's really important for us right now as a generation, for the next generation and even moving forward. So I think that's really important for me to pass down, because I think there's a lot of images that are very over edited, And I think that that's really hard on young women, or even young men, or even people that are just now getting into modeling, to see that.
It's interesting too to see. I mean, like everything in life, there's things swing from one extreme to another.
Right.
And we've seen like over edited and like every like zooming into the pixel, and like every flaw. And one photo takes hours and hours and hours of editing time. And now we're even seeing like major brands that are now saying like the more natural look, or any of the content in our magazines will be no editing done at all, even on cover photos for some publications and stuff.
Right. And I think that that's a huge push, is that these corporations are finally realizing that there is some damage, in my opinion, that can be done from over editing. And I understand that there's a place and there's a time for it. But I think what we need to see in mainstream media is natural subjects, and, of course, a touch here or there, but nothing that is so extreme that it's not for that intended purposes. I think if you're doing something that is supposed to be touched up and supposed to look extreme, then that's fine. But I think for everyday life, like kind of what we're shooting today, it's more or less, this is the model, this is what they look like every single day, and I'm just here making the actual photo look good, as opposed to like going in and, like you said, pulling it into that pixel and touching up that individual pixel.
Well, since we haven't shot yet, we're about to do that after we get done with this interview. I'm very excited to hear that that's the approach we're taking today, because that means it's going to save me hours on the back end of editing time. So I'm very excited about that. But I'm not really big on editing anyway. It's one of those things that's just not fun for me personally. I like this side of it, the creative ideation and figuring out how we utilize this space and use it to its maximum, and that kind of stuff. So
me too. That was my favorite part. So when you were sending me the images, looking through it, and I was like, okay, I have like ideas, but then you don't really know what it looks like until you get into that space. And as a model, I think you see things a little bit differently. So that's why coming into this space with you and like hearing your thoughts or your ideas, and you're like, well, I can't really get into there, and I can't do, you can't do some things, which is really interesting to hear on how, we might have all these ideas, but there are technical aspects that we don't think about, that you're like, well, we have to make sure we're watching this and this. So that's cool for me to start learning, because I think it helps me kind of judge this space a little bit better.
Yeah. And I think it's also one of the things where I've seen some models transition into then being on the other side of the camera and turning into photographers. And they know this side, they know how to interact, they know what to expect, they know how they want to be treated. But then on the flip side, once they learn the technical side of that side of the camera, again, they've got all that perspective they're bringing into the mix, which I think is great.
You don't have to worry about me. I have
no competition there anytime soon.
As of right now, I have no intention of being on the other side of the camera. I think that
never say never.
Always, yeah. That's why I said as of right now. You never know in the future, but as of right now, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. And in what I do for my everyday profession is I'm a cosmetologist by trade. So I like making the people presentable for the camera, so to speak, or, doing that part. Yeah, as of right now, I have no interest in learning the other side of the camera. So for right now, I think you're good. When
I first started doing photography with models, I would actually hire hair and makeup artists, because I thought that's what you were supposed to or had to do on every shoot. And being a guy, I had no idea, and single at the time, maybe that played into it too, I'm not sure. I had no idea how long makeup took.
Right.
And I just remember the first time it was like, we're an hour and a half into the shoot time. We hadn't even gotten the model out of the chair yet.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, come on, let's speed it up.
Right. And I think that that's such a great thing to offer. As a model, I have learned how to do my own hair and makeup, but it's always nice to have that being offered, especially, like I said, for a higher end image type of a shoot.
Sure.
So I think that was really great of you. It sucks that the hair and makeup person didn't tell you how long it was going to take, because typically if I'm scheduling someone, I'll say to the photographer, hey, like, I'd like to get my hair and makeup done. It's easiest if we meet at the space. If our shoot time is 8 o'clock, do you mind if we come at this time? We'll stay out of your way and I'll get my hair and makeup done. Or I adjust the time for myself if I know I need to be there like today at 8 a.m., you know, I was up at 6 o'clock in the morning making sure I was ready. So, or I would go to that hair and makeup artist beforehand. But I think that's another thing for, you know, models to be aware of is that, you know, hair and makeup isn't always provided. So I think learning how to do it to an extent for yourself is great. I also think that's important for photographers to know hair and makeup's not cheap.
Right.
For a photo shoot.
Especially someone that's good and knows what they're doing and
right.
has clean brushes and all that kind of good stuff. You just don't want anybody doing it.
And it's key that you're working with a licensed hair and makeup artist. So making sure that they're actually licensed in their state is so important. As a cosmetology instructor, you know, I have seen so many people that are unlicensed doing work, and that's okay. But really, when you are working with somebody who's licensed, they're trained in the things that you mentioned, the hygienic issues of making sure their makeup is clean. They're trained in the issues of making sure their sanitation is up to par. And I've seen some great makeup artists who aren't trained naturally, and they still have that. But I always support my trade. Someone's going to tell you, make sure your makeup artist is licensed in your state if they have a requirement for that, which our state does.
This wasn't even on our list of questions, but I think this is great because it's, again, as you have these conversations, you kind of unravel some of this stuff that are like, oh, I didn't have that on my list, but it's a great conversation because it's an integral part, especially when you start getting into commercial work and, you know, magazines and publication and probably Runway, et cetera. You're going to tend to have more hair and makeup provided in those kind of scenarios versus a hobbyist, you know. So
correct. And I think also two different photo shoots, they're going to require you to work with a specific makeup artist as well. So I think that that's important to know when you're working with like catalogs or even movies. Most of those times that they're in a union, so that you aren't allowed to work with a makeup artist that's not outside of that that practice. So I think it's important to be respectful to your photographer. If you don't know, ask. Say, hey, like, are you able to provide a hair and makeup artist? If not, you know, make sure you're asking questions about your shoot, and then also ask the photographer, like, hey, what do I need? You know, or what do you need from me? I think that that's really important. Kindness goes a long way. You know, I know we talked about this earlier, that, you know, I always offer at the end of the photo shoot, if my photographer is leaving, I'll be like, hey, do you need help? I just think that's a respect thing. You offered to carry my bags in. Hey, I'll help you carry your bags out.
Good thing I did that then.
I'm not touching any of the camera equipment though, but I will carry the lights.
I think that's important too. I mean, you talked about, you know, that willingness and that kindness kind of thing, but also communication, I think, is also critically important in that. You know, so how should I come prepared? Do you want my hair to be a certain way? Are you looking for my makeup to be a certain way when I arrive? Or do I need to bring anything in that regards, you know, because of the look that we're trying to accomplish? And again, wardrobe and, you know, what are you bringing? What am I bringing? Is any wardrobe being provided at all? You know, those kind of conversations up front are important.
Absolutely. And I think you and I had a really great conversation. I mean, I know our shoot is more kind of just laissez-faire. Like, we're not really shooting anything specific. We're kind of, I always call it the menagerie. We're doing a lot of different things. So my wardrobe is a lot of different things, but I'd rather, like I mentioned to you, I was like, this looks really big. I promise. I know I brought too much wardrobe.
She brought a really big suitcase.
I did.
So you guys know.
I did. But you know what? To me, I'd rather be prepared, and I don't know what's going to look good in the space. So to have more than a couple options and to get that photographer's perspective, like you said, I had a couple ideas, but I was like, let me just pack a few extra things, because you might say, oh, that would look nice with this. And
I tease about the really big bag, because if you look at the quantity of gear that I have around this place and the size of my camera bag, you'd probably say the same thing in regards to me too. So it's not one-sided here.
Right. And so for you, what does it take to actually like prepare for a shoot? So you know on the model side, like, so what is it? Like, I packed all my stuff like last night. So like, how long does it actually take you to like prep your equipment? How long does it take like after a shoot like this to actually make it into the model's hands? Like, what does that look like? I
would say not counting communication back and forth with the models, because that alone can be, you know, a couple hours of back and forth, you know, 5 minutes here and there, but it adds up, right? And there's, you know, I like to over communicate, especially, you know, if we're starting to plan a month out, then I'm checking base again in 2 weeks out. I'm checking base again and communicating again a week out, you know, 2 days before, the day before.
Right.
really
and I
over-communicating.
appreciate that as a model. So, because, I have a lot going on, and February is always my biggest month. I'm crazy busy. So that communication for me was helpful to say, hey, like, are you still coming tomorrow? And I'm like, oh yeah, right. I do have that photo shoot tomorrow.
I've had enough no-shows over the years to know that, even warning signs of if I'm not getting communication back, it's a red flag to me of, oh, something might be going awry here, or if it just makes me uncomfortable as we get closer and closer, I'm not hearing anything back. I'm like, I may even cancel if I haven't worked with the person before, I'm not getting any communication at all. That's part of my preparation process, not only mentally, but also what gear I need to bring,
Right.
So, knowing what we're shooting, indoor versus outdoor, flash or no flash, usually I'm using flash even outdoors. But literally it's, go through the whole equipment kit list first,
Okay.
memory cards, lenses, backup lenses, which camera am I using, because kind of a gearhead, the whole new video coming on that soon as being someone that likes gear. So I usually have at least 5 or 6 cameras going at any
Okay.
given time. Which ones am I bringing? Which ones am I packing? Which lens for which situations that we're going to be encountering? Do I need wider lenses because of the vibe we're trying to go for? Am I going to be working at a distance a lot, so I need longer lenses? Memory cards. Are we shooting videos? And then again all the video gear and lighting for that, and microphones and
So
lav
typically
mics
on any given shoot, how long does it take you to go through that list, filter out things, and then be like, all right, this is what I need to bring?
It's probably at least an hour or two of prep.
Okay.
And then I would say it's probably another hour or two of just gear, gear loading, bag loading, double checking, battery charging, all that kind of stuff. And then again, just like this shoot alone, probably the volume of stuff is at least 4 or 5, trips to the car of, lugging stuff into the car and loading up, and then getting here and unloading it, and then loading it back, and then unloading it again, right? So,
Right.
yeah, I would say, and that's not even, of course, on the post side of things. You asked, I think you mentioned that a little bit. So,
Right.
Obviously when we're done, then we're, some photographers will actually provide the models with every photo and just do a photo dump. I don't know if you've experienced that.
I have.
A photographer's like, you sort through them and you look at all the junky and crappy photos that aren't good, you should have never seen, in my opinion. So I do all the initial, we call it culling, C-U-L-L-I-N-G, culling
Okay.
of those photos. I do that with all my shoots because.
So like you're not going to send me a picture of my eyes shut.
Right, exactly.
Right,
Or the flash
or
didn't
my
go
funny
off,
faces.
or the camera was off, or it was uneven, radically uneven, or I don't want you seeing my flaws, first of all, right? I don't want you seeing the bad work, but I also don't want you to have to waste that time to go through all those images when I should have done that work.
Okay.
Right? So
And see, as a model, I actually don't mind sorting through some of the photos, and I'll tell you a really funny story about that. So I did a photo shoot a few years ago where one of the images was super overexposed, according to the photographer, but it was my favorite image.
Really?
And it was the very first shot. And he was like, I hate that image. And I was like, but I love it. And I even put out that feeler, when I ended up posting it. I was like, listen, the photographer knows that this is overexposed, but I just loved the way that it looked. And it was my favorite photo of the entire
that's
set.
interesting.
Yeah.
I might have to rethink a couple things.
And so I said to the photographer, I said, would you mind, because I understand that concept. And, sometimes what you might think is a bad photo, maybe the model might love. But yeah, definitely the ones with my eyes closed, that's my biggest flaw.
And of course, everybody has different styles. So usually my approach then on the editing process is after I've called through those images and deleted the duplicates, especially if I'm working outside or just rapid firing, there might be 8 shots in a row that are relatively similar. But just for either sake of because you're in movement or because I'm afraid of your eyes being closed in one of the shots or whatever, or there's just a subtle little hand or finger placement or something like that makes one better than another. Trying to narrow that down, those kind of things. But usually then I'll provide, this is good because we're going to talk about this later anyway, so we might as well talk about it on camera. I'll provide a link for you to see the images that have made the first cut. So it's not uncommon on a photo shoot, maybe not today, but in most cases I'll usually shoot 12 to 1,400 photos in one 2-hour session. And then I shoot a lot, by the way. Some people shoot a lot less than that. And I'll narrow that down to probably 400 or 500 in the first pass. And then not only do I select images I liked from the shoot, but then I also allow the models to pick from that as well. And those are the images then I'll edit, and then I provide
That's awesome.
a Dropbox
because,
or something like that.
Some photographers, this is another thing for models to know, they only provide 2 or 3 edited images. So I think that that's important to have a communication with that photographer up front, like what can I expect out of this? And if the photographer themselves is going to select 3 or 4 edits, I always suggest to the model, hey, communicate this with your photographer. Can you send me the ones that you like, and then you actually pick different ones so that you're not choosing the same ones.
Yeah.
And then you get more from both ends. The photographer gets, again, I don't know what the word I want to say is, but like a look into what the model likes, and then the model gets a look into what the photographer likes as far as photo-wise. And I think that makes for a great arrangement of photos. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's something that you should be talking about. How many images can I expect?
Yep. Because it's going to be different for every photographer, and it's going to be different based on who's paying who or what the scenario is and expectations there are. So it's good to, again, over communicate and just know, again, you don't want to come out of the shoot and be like, oh, I was expecting to get 100 images because that's what the last photographer gave to me, and I only got 4 from this photographer. Well, did you talk about that?
Right. And what I love it too is like, for us, we had a conversation about like last minute. I asked Scott, I was like, hey, would you mind doing X, Y, Z? We're not going to talk about that yet. It's going to be a surprise. So
maybe I'll put it at the end of the video.
At the end of the video, you guys can see the surprise.
There, right?
And I asked him, I said, would you mind? Because my intention at first was not to do that. And I was like, hey, would you mind doing this extra photo? We're gonna use that term for right now. And he's like, sure. And so I'm really excited about that, because that was not intentionally planned, but it's gonna work out really great, and I'm really looking forward to that. So we can spice the viewers.
Right, we're gonna tease it out a little bit.
Tease it out a little bit. Tease it out a little bit.
So let's go back to the modeling work you've done, because I do want to make sure we get enough time to talk about your pageantry side of things too. And then, of course, we got to shoot yet before we're kicked out of the space. So, what kind of modeling stuff have you done over the years? What stuff do you particularly like shooting, as far as like genres or types of content, studio versus on location versus outdoors, indoors, fashion versus other content? What do you like?
So I really like to do a little bit of everything. However, I think it's important that you research your photographer. Some photographers are better outdoors. Some photographers are better indoors. I do not like shooting in the cold. I'm not a cold
we'll never do that.
person. I will do it on occasions. Like if we were like, I brought a long coat, we could have went outside and done like 10 images, and then we'd be right back inside. So I'm a reptile. I like it warm. I like it. Now if it was hot, I'd be all for it. So I really don't mind changing it up. I like doing everything. The only thing I don't shoot is boudoir or nude. And that is just because of, number one, my age, but number two, because I'm a pageant queen, I want to make sure that even though boudoir can be very tasteful, it's not something that I want to shoot anymore. I have shot it in the past where it's still tasteful and it's still a little sexy, but I'm a little bit older now. And so, I've kind of had the experience of doing that. I did a lot of swimsuit back in the day. I'm trying to get back to that, so we'll see how that goes. We are shooting a swimsuit today, so those photos may never appear on Earth. We got to see. We got to see what they look like. But I'm really working on my fitness as I get older. But I did a lot of swimsuit, a lot of catalog.
And you mentioned Runway too.
And I've done Runway. So I like doing a little bit everything. I don't know if I could just stick with one thing. I know some models are really good with one thing. I tend to get a lot of catalog work just because of my look. I tend to get a lot of beauty work because I do have giant eyelids and green eyes that I can't see out of, but that's okay. So I tend to get a lot of like beauty work and headshot work because I don't mind about like what people put on my face, so to speak, as far as like little gems or like orange slices. None of that really bothers me. I'm kind of game. The only thing I won't shoot with is like bugs. We're not doing bugs. So.
Well, I feel like we have to dive into Runway a little bit more because, again, unique perspective that we have here of you not only having done Runway, I think the last few interviews that I've done, they hadn't done Runway. So we couldn't even dive into that, but also being a runway coach, right? So
Right.
I definitely have to ask you questions now
Right.
because you're the expert. So tell us a little bit about what's the difference between runway and other styles of modeling, and what's like the number one, let's say the top 2 tips you would give to somebody that's thinking about doing runway.
So runway is very, you are a coat hanger. That's how I like to describe it. You have no facial expression to a degree, depending on what runway you're doing. Now, there are some runway shows that you can have a little bit more personality and you can have a little bit of a different step, but fashion runway is very straightforward. You are the coat hanger. You are literally there to show off what is on your body. No more, no less. Typically with a runway, you can expect your hair to be whatever the designer wants and your makeup to be whatever it wants. And sometimes they even put you in different hair. I've worn wigs, I've worn pieces that have covered my entire face where I could only see out of one eye. I've worn a lampshade over my head. I've done a lot of like kind of cool concepts. And I also have a really good friend who is an international model. Her name's Ashley DeMeo, and she has walked runways all over the world. So
Awesome.
She has walked in Paris and Milan, and she's walked New York multiple times. And so really watching her now kind of emerge, because I don't do as many runways as more, it has been really cool. And I'll get to chat with her about like what was her experience like, and she can tell me about the behind the scenes. And if you want to get more into runway, that's your go-to girl is reaching out to her, because she is phenomenal and she's very fierce on the runway. But it's very different from like your smiling to your facial expressions. Your body language is completely different. So you're typically very, very straight. It is a very crossed walk instead of more of like I said, a happy-go-lucky walk. The walk is completely different from a fun runway or a pageant walk.
I always remember seeing like on America's Next Top Model where it's like how much coaching they had to do on runway walking, because
Right.
so many of them had never done it before, and like you said, it's very different.
It's very different.
And so I'm wondering if, like, well, first of all, have you ever had any runway mishaps in your
Yes,
experience?
I have. So I did a runway here in Pittsburgh where we actually walked over a pool, and the runway.
I think I remember that event.
The runway ended up being wet, so I had to be really careful. And thankfully I didn't slip or trip or fall, but I know I think one model did end up falling. And
Not in the pool.
Not in the pool,
Okay,
just on the runway. And she ended up just picking herself right up and right back. I have broken my heel on stage. When I'm walking, my heel has snapped, and you just have to keep walking and keep doing it, and you just have to act like nothing happened. Thankfully, I have not had a wardrobe malfunction to where, unfortunately, I have, been quote unquote embarrassed. But I know other models have. Yeah, I've walked into people, I've walked into walls, especially when your face is covered. It's
So
happened.
is there a standard for runway? Like typically in runway, and maybe it's different for local, and depending upon what the event is and
Yes,
what the
it's
fashion
very,
is,
very
as
different.
far as heights or body styles or anything like that.
Yes. So here in Pittsburgh, fashion is changing. So I will say we are seeing much more diversity, even in New York and Paris, than we've ever seen before. So in Pittsburgh, I feel like it's totally different. I feel like in here and almost if you know how to do the walk, I think they're more lenient on heights, size, shapes, and even body types. However, typically in New York and in Paris and Milan, and especially if you're working with more of a high-end couture designer, you're typically 5'9" and up. And so that is typically the standard, and you're typically between a size 0 and a size 6. And the reason for that is that is the most sample sizes that they typically make, unless they are considered a plus size couture designer. Now, like I said, I have seen within the past year or two that diversity growing and changing, and I love seeing that because I truly believe that we should be seeing every size on a runway. I think that plays into like modeling psyche 101, even as a young girl seeing these beautiful models on billboards, and even, you're going to laugh at this, but I remember the old Marlboro ads with the beautiful girls in the bikinis with the cigarettes, so to speak. And that's what made it enticing, And so I think we do need to have that inclusion and that diversity. And to me, I sit there and say, well, if a child or a younger person can't see themselves in that position, then they don't know it's a possibility. So if you don't see a male photographer who maybe looks like you, or who talks like you, or walks like you, or acts like you, maybe you don't think that you can do that. And so I think the more diversity in the runways is best. But yeah, that's typically the difference. And like I said, the friend of mine who does it, she's 5'10". And so she always makes fun of me. She's like, it's only 2 inches. I'm like, yeah, well, you're 2 inches. I would love to have that.
It seems enormous.
It definitely does. It definitely makes a difference.
Especially when you add another 2, 3, 4, 5 inches of heels on top of that, right?
And I always say, I said, I know, but like I said, I love watching her do her modeling, because she'll help me on different things, as it's been a minute since I've done fashion, and I can help her with other things. And we've gotten really, really close over the past few months. So like I said to your viewers, if you're looking for fashion, she's your girl.
Well, I'll make sure to get the link and throw it down below. So if there's, if you want to check out, check out her work too, but also, maybe reach out to her. You can do that too.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Let's shift the pageantry stuff, because I'm really curious about this, because I know nothing about the pageantry world at all. I mean, I've watched occasionally on TV, and I know the general concept of it, but there's also probably some misnomers I have about it too, as probably many people do. But how did you get into that, first of all? And then, what's a typical pageantry event? Is it the right way to even say it? What are the basic premises of it, or how's it structured? How do they work?
So it's hard, because I've only ever done pageants as a married woman. So there is pageantry for every age, down to tiny babies, to anybody who's even 50, 60 years old. So what the great part about what my pageantry does, which is married women, it's anybody typically over the age of 18 that's legally married. So you can have women that are 18. We have women that I've met that are in their 50s and 60s, and we are all competing. And so I think each pageant has a different premise, but the pageant system that I'm doing is called the Galaxy International Pageant System. So I always like to say it's like Miss USA, but for married women. And now Miss USA has the ability that you can now compete as a married woman. They actually just lifted their age restrictions and their marital status, which is crazy. It's never been done before.
So there's a Miss USA, but there's no Mrs. USA?
So there's no technical Mrs. USA. There are pageants that have USA in the title. There is a few pageant systems that have USA components to them. So there is a Mrs. America system, which is the longest married women's pageant that has been out there. And I have competed with that system before as well. There is Mrs. International system. I've unfortunately never competed with that system. There's a Mrs. Earth system, but my favorite is my current system, and that's the Galaxy system. And the reason is just because of the way that the boss, so to speak, the owner of the pageant system, has really laid the foundation of the system. So what I love about the Galaxy system is it really is like a family. The minute I entered this system about 4 years ago, they welcomed me 100% with open arms as who I was. I came into that system very hesitant because I had competed before, and at that time, as I mentioned, I'm trying to get healthier, I'm trying to get physically fit. There were things said to me that you really shouldn't say to a woman. Things like I needed to lose weight, things like I will never win this system. And it didn't matter the work that I was putting in, it didn't matter at my core of who I was. And this system was like, no, we absolutely love what you're doing. We want you to be here, and we would love to have you. And then when I actually got there in person, it matched. So a lot of the times, like, you hear all these things about a system. Maybe it's this or maybe it's that. And you don't know what to believe because you've never been there. So, but when I actually got there, both the director and her staff were very, very kind, very, very humble. You even got to meet the director's family. So the director is the owner. And to me, that's what made the difference for me. When I left with girls that I still talk to from 4 years ago. These are girls that I talk to, not necessarily every single day, but they can message me and say, hey, like, how was your Christmas? How was your holiday? And they live all across the world.
So it's a sisterhood in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's kind of like I hate using the word sorority, but it kind of is like a little sorority.
Too, right?
So, but in a great version, it is a very big sisterhood. And so I'm proud of that. And I have competed this is my 4th year in this system, which tells you a lot. It tells you, number 1, that I really love the system. It tells you, number 2, that I really want to be a part of this system. And number 3, I really enjoy this system. I also am competing this year because I was blessed to be awarded the title of Mrs. US Galaxy. And that's not a title you can ask for. It's a title that's given, which is humbling and like surreal all at the same time. So the last Mrs. US Galaxy title that was given was over 5 years ago. So it's a title that comes directly from the staff of the organization, which is really important because that tells me that the work that I was doing before as Mrs. Pennsylvania that mattered. And originally I was going to come back as Pennsylvania again, and I decided to actually apply for a different title. I wanted to apply as Mrs. East Coast, kind of move up a little bit and represent the East Coast. And I got a phone call from the office 3 days later, and they're like, we would really like to offer you the US title.
Awesome.
And
congratulations.
How do you say no to that? Like, I was very humbled. I was like, me? Like, me? You want me to take this amazing title? I
feel like this is, and so leave in the comments here if you want us to do a deep dive on this, because I'm feeling like we're only going to scratch the surface here today on this content. What are some of the differences between pageantry and modeling, and then what are some of the things that have helped you having done one or the other? Like, has one helped you to be better at the other?
Yeah, so I think the key differences in pageantry and modeling is if you're going to be doing fashion walking, the walk for pageantry is totally different. So depending on what your pageant system does, my pageant has swimsuit, they have evening gown, and they have a place called fashion wear, and all 3 have a different walk. Gown is a little bit more slower and a little bit softer of a walk, whereas fashion wear can be upbeat, spicy, kind of like I mentioned with that fun walk. And then typically your other walk is just like your normal, typical pageant walk. So it's a little bit different. Also in modeling, you're more behind the scenes. I've never really done an interview as a model like that before. So, you might get interviewed for a magazine or something like that, but it's all written. This is an interview in person. So you have to get a little bit more handling of what you've accomplished and be able to talk to somebody in person. And you talk in front of a panel of judges, or you talk in round robin style. So you go from judge to judge to judge, again, depending on the system. So it can be a little intimidating when you're coming into a room of 12 judges and you're sitting there and you're basically bearing your soul on this is why you want this job, so to speak. So pageantry is a job in itself. It's a little crazy to think of what we do, but it really does make a difference. And I think modeling can too. I've been able to accomplish some really amazing things as a pageant title holder.
Such as?
And so such as I have been able to give out over 1,500 free haircuts. I've been able to donate over 5,000 items within the past couple of years to the homeless. And yeah, I could do that as a model, but I wasn't getting the same interest as I was as a pageant queen. When I'm out and about in the city as a pageant queen, you have a crown and you have a sash and everybody wants to know what that's about. And I always like to say, it's like the shiny microphone. It's like, stop me and ask me about this. And even though you can do that as a model, I think it's harder as a model unless you are like influencer or very well known on social media, or even very well known in your town. I go out every day, and when I'm out in my everyday clothes, I don't get stopped and ask, oh, tell me about this. So I always call the crown and the sash as a conversation starter. it allows me to have a conversation about what really is important and why I'm doing pageantry, which is all about my platform and giving back to the community.
So let's just very quickly, because again, I want to get to a couple last things on modeling, and then we have to give ourselves enough time to shoot. So what is your platform?
So my platform is Heart Health Awareness at Any Age. It started when my dad suffered a heart attack in 2005 that left him completely paralyzed.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, on October 10th of 2020, my dad lost his life to his underlying heart condition, and he's not here anymore. In addition to that, one of my best friends passed away from sudden cardiac arrest, and I myself found out that I have a heart condition that thankfully doesn't have any negative side effects as of right now, but it's called MVP. And so what I'm doing with my platform is I'm doing education on simple tips and tricks that can make somebody heart healthy. And my other focus is mind, body, and soul. So giving people that support that they need to get basic hygiene necessity. And my other focus is hands-only CPR. It's really important for me to let people know that if you know hands-only CPR, which is just pressing in on the chest and doing the compressions, you can increase somebody's life expectancy by 40%.
Wow.
And it's so easy to learn. You can learn it in 2 minutes flat, again, right after this interview, on American Heart Association website. But what I think is most important for people to know is that 80 to 85% of cardiovascular disease is preventable. And so I think as a national title holder, it's really important for me to get out there and get those simple tips and tricks from people like you that make a difference. So I always say, what's one thing in your life that you do that makes you heart healthy? So,
is that an actual question?
Yeah, that's an actual question.
Oh, wow. Photo shoots.
Okay, so you like
right?
photo shoots.
So, I mean, it's just that's actively moving, and there's a lot of up and down and lifting and moving around. Yeah.
So to me, that's a tip and trick, because if you're a photographer out there, or if you want to have a hobby, moving increases your energy. And that's something totally different. So I always like to say, what is it in your life that you're already doing that makes you heart healthy? Because somebody watching might say, oh, I never thought that a photo shoot could actually help me become heart healthy. The easiest thing is to start drinking more water. Because most of the time what people don't know is that 85 to 90% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. Right. Chronic dehydration can cause daytime fatigue, it can cause short-term memory loss, and we do not get enough water. So that's always my first tip, is drink more water.
Especially if it's out of a cool mug, like
cool
412 photo mug. Not available online currently, but maybe someday.
Soon.
So throw down in the comments if you
soon.
Want swag. I got some ideas for swag down the line, but maybe when we get the subscription base up a little bit bigger, we'll start rolling out a swag store.
I'm going to get the first mug.
There you go.
This mug.
So let's wrap up with just some tips for models. Just outside of what we already talked about and some of the tips you've already provided to them. What are let's say another 2 tips that you would give to models on, if they're new in their journey, or even if they're mid-journey. Let's say even mid-journey.
Mid-journey, I would just say keep practicing. I go online and I research poses and I practice in my mirror, because there might be something that you haven't done for a while and that you don't do for a while. And I say that even for beginners, practice in a mirror. But even mid-journey, I think we need to remember not to be so hard on ourselves. We expect a lot of perfection things, and just have fun. Have fun at the photo shoot. Whether it's you need music or whether you just need a vibe, but have fun with it. And at the end of the day, it's a photo shoot. Yeah. So we can always reshoot. So I just think just reminding yourself of that. If
it's not fun, then why are we doing it? Especially as a hobbyist,
right. And even as a professional, I feel like your job should be fun. Yeah,
it translates. I mean, it certainly translates into the images, but even just the environment and wanting to rebook somebody and shoot again. If it's a miserable experience, who wants to come back and do that again?
Right. And what would you say would be 2 tips that we didn't cover for models for a photo shoot?
Oh, wow. This is a spur of the moment. We've covered so much already. I'm just going to reemphasize communication is vitally important. I think, again, you can't communicate, and there's no such thing as over-communication. I think number 2 is just really study your craft. And you touched on that a little bit, so I appreciate that. Because I think even if you're not a professional, treating it, even if it's your first shoot or you only do it occasionally, treating it professionally, I think is important. we all have a very limited amount of time on this ball of mud, right?
Right.
So, respecting the other person's time by bringing your all to it, but also, of course, being on time, and that's part of professionalism. But just, if you're serious about it, and if it's something you want to do on a regular basis, then you have to work at that craft just like anything else.
Right.
I'm constantly watching YouTube videos about how to get better at photography, or learn new tips and tricks, or learn new techniques, or learn about the newest gear, or whatever it happens to be. And I think, there's somewhat of an expectation for, but also I think models should put in as much work as I'm putting in on the other side of the camera. So
I would agree with that. And if you are unsure, again, I think what you said, communication is key. So communicate to your photographer. Like, I'm still new, so I'm going to need a little bit more direction. And I think being open to that direction is important as well. So.
Yeah, it's not uncommon if I shot with a very new model that it's like, okay, what do I do with my hands? Or what do we do now? And like, they're out of poses within like the first 2 minutes of the shoot. And I'm like, okay, well, I can give you some tips and some ideas, but it'd be better if you would have, to practice ahead of time before you come to the shoot, or study up on some posing techniques or ideas. So again, it's I can concentrate more on the subtleties versus having to coach through, every pose through the whole shoot too. It's very tiring.
And one other thing too is you could also ask your photographer, would it be okay for me to bring a body mirror? Mm-hmm. I think especially when you're new starting out, I remember, again, my friend Ashley gave me that tip. She said, when I first started out, I brought a body mirror. And I thought that was a really good tip too. So shout out again to my friend Ashley for that last tip.
Or you can just book an Airbnb with the biggest mirror in the history.
We need to show that mirror later.
Yeah, I was going to say. We'll see it in some of the photos. You actually can't see it here.
I need that mirror in my life.
I think you maybe see a little bit of it back here, but it's a massive mirror that goes to almost to the ceiling. So, but with that, we're going to wrap up this session because, again, we need to do some shooting.
Right.
And so I really appreciate the time, though. I really appreciate your insights. I think, again, this is my third or fourth one of these that we've recorded now, but it was very different as far as the conversation and some of the specifics we went into, which is great.
Love it.
Just giving different perspectives and giving people a platform to share their story, but also share their unique voice and their unique experiences through this is why I'm doing this. So. Again, appreciate it.
Thank you.
And again, appreciate if you leave some comments and let us know what you thought of this. Let us know what questions you'd like to see asked of future models and sessions like this. And as always, I appreciate, I should say, a subscription and subscribing to the channel, because that certainly helps in long term making more content like this. So have a great day. See you guys later. Tune in again next time, and let's go have some fun. Let's go make some images.
I'm ready.
All right.
Do it.
That's it.
Love it.
Good job.
That was great.
Yeah.